Hi, we're Lou and Becky Shirey. We were so pleased when we were approached and asked to fill in a bit of oral history around Protestant women of the chapel. Lou's parents were stationed in Kitzingen, Germany in 1954, 1955. They were only there 1 year. But during that time, PWC was talked about as as it moved from vision to being actually talked about and formulated. And their first meeting prior to the 1955 conference was in their living room. And it was, we've always been so pleased that his family had uh, a kind of a place at the table in that inception of Protestant women of the chapel. What do you remember about that, Lou?
Well, I was only about 5 or 6 at the time, so what I remember is what my parents have said to me and told me about. I do remember the house; it was huge. Uh, about 20 something years later, when I was also assigned in Germany, Becky and I went to Kitzingen and found the house we lived in. At that time, there were 4 families living in it, so it gives you an idea of the size of it. I can imagine, my father was a chaplain and very strong leaders. I can imagine that Dad would see the great need, participating with other chaplains and other leaders to go about establishing. They would offer the hospitality of our home for that initial setting. So thankful for that too, as part of my life in the development of PWC.
So it occurred to us later with that beginning in their parents' living room, or that initial meeting talking about it, that you were one of the first military brats growing up under the influence of Protestant women in the chapel. How has that made a difference for you?
Well, when my family moved to Fort Riley, Kansas, and then on to Fort Rucker, Alabama, a couple of things that I remember mother being involved in PWC. One was at Fort Rucker, Alabama. I was a high schooler during that time, and that particular group of ladies, one of the things that they wanted to do was to help decorate the chapel. And so at Christmas time, they would have this massive tree, and they had what was called chrismons, and these were the symbols of the Christian faith and the biblical symbols. And they were made out of styrofoam. And I remember Mom coaxing me, and I soon found it was fun taking this little hot iron wire thing and cutting the styrofoam forms to make these chrismons to go upon this chapel uh, Christmas tree. We still have those instructions of how many of those. There were probably several hundred of them that went onto the tree. That's a lot of fun for me as a kid to be a part of that.
Um, they were made out of styrofoam, but I saw them and they were glittered up and decorated. And on that tree, they looked fantastic. Later on, I was inspired to make some for our own family Christmas tree. Then we used that for years. But as Lou and I became engaged before we were married, my mother in law, future mother in law, and her PWC cohort friends pulled me aside to make sure I understood the importance of Protestant women at the chapel. I remember that they encouraged me to make it a priority in my life and also a place of ministry to others. And so, from the very beginning, our first military post, I found out about Protestant Women of the Chapel when it was starting, and I was there. It During those years, it was a huge support for us, especially being new to the military. And then, Lou, you also have experience as a military chaplain and a Protestant Women of the Chapel advisor. So, what would you say about that?
Well, I knew the importance of the Protestant Women of the Chapel as the ministry within the community. Um, there were times I really felt like the PWC probably provided as much ministry as other things that were going on throughout the post. as I continued in rank, became an installation chaplain. I still remember being at Fort Polk, Louisiana, my last assignment, and that PWC community was so strong. We were deployed a number of people during those years, and the PWC became an absolute place of safety and care for the women, whose many of them, their husbands were deployed during that time.
Those rich times to look back on the memory of those early beginnings. It's always pleased me so much that, as I said, Lou's parents had some small part to play in the formation of Protestant women of the chapel. Later, I went back to Germany and I spoke at a military installation that was being shut down. It was a chapel-sponsored event in which there were Protestant women of the chapel there. It also coincided with the inception of Protestant Women of the Chapel International. So it would have been in 2004, 2005 time frame. And I remember really being impressed to speak from Isaiah 43. And let me read verses 18 and 19. Forget the former things. Do not dwell on the past. See, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? So I began to think about those women who met in 1955 and when PWC became a reality. And they had a present tense vision from God. God did not say, I'm going to do a new thing, or that I did it in the past, but he said, I am. God is doing a new thing, present tense. He was doing a new thing in 2004 or 5 when I spoke there, and PWC International was coming into being. And then with the changes that we've seen since then, with the leadership being established at the local level, he is still doing a new thing. God is still moving forward in Protestant Women of the Chapel, and he will complete his purposes for this organization and use this organization as he has, this ministry as he has in the past. But he's doing a new thing now. And so as you move forward in your leadership this year, just know that Lou and I are praying for you. We are blessing you abundantly as you move forward, and you take a part, you partner with God in doing what he is doing right now, today, in Protestant Women of the Chapel. We love you and appreciate you.